Greetings to everyone who's just joining us. I'm Nick Curley, president of the Highlandtown Community Association, and thank you for joining us tonight for our community meeting. Tonight's meeting format is different than usual. We're hosting a town hall with some of our elected officials, local and other, and we're going to get started in just a few minutes here. Jan Bledsoe, great to see you. Thanks for being here. Right, everyone can expect that we'll probably get started right around 7:05, which will allow me about 2 minutes just to finish admitting folks and taking care of some housekeeping issues. To that end, a couple of updates for everyone. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the HCA YouTube channel. So be advised that this meeting is being recorded. We are not going to allow any abusive language or behavior on this call tonight. You can say whatever you want to, but you have to say it politely. And we will not tolerate any trolling. So if someone asks a question, and you're not happy with the way it got answered, you can ask the same question and try and help whoever you're asking understand, like if there's something that you think wasn't clear. But once it's been asked and answered, we're going to move on. So here is how the format for tonight's call is going to work and why we're having this call. So I guess to start at the beginning, we have recently had a significant uptick in violence in Highlandtown and Baltimore Highlands. There have been several recent high-profile homicides and a number of low-level crimes that have made people feel unsafe. So the purpose of tonight's call is to address the questions that were submitted to us in writing via the Google form we created for the neighborhood about 2 weeks ago to our elected officials in attendance. And when that is complete, we are going to open the floor, and anyone has a question they would like to address to any of the elected or community officials on the call, they are welcome to. It is my goal to effectively and efficiently moderate this call tonight, which means that I'm not going to be sharing opinions unless someone is interested in knowing what they are. And if you want to know how I feel about something, you can ask me by raising your hand. Otherwise, what we're going to do is monitor the chat for questions to read to our elected officials and look for raised hands when we ask for them. Vanessa Freund is on this call and will be helping me with that. So here in general terms is what you can expect from the agenda tonight. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Councilmember Cohen and Marilyn Mosby, if she is on the call, or someone from our office if she is not, to make brief, meaning 2 to 3 minute opening statements talking about their engagement in our community and what their role is with respect to public safety and violence reduction, and any thoughts they want to share about their role in addressing those things. We will then take opening statements of 2 to 3 minutes from any other elected officials that are on this call that I can't see on my screen right now. I believe Delegate Learman will be joining us about an hour from now, and I believe we've got Senator Bill Ferguson or his office for the next 40 minutes. Bill is on. Great. Glad to hear it. Thanks, Tyler. As participants, you'll have more freedom than I do to scroll through this list and address your questions, so you can think about that. And I'll just tell you up front that I've never managed a call with this many participants, so your patience is appreciated. With that, I'd like to go ahead and get started. So, Councilman Cohen, would you please introduce yourself and 2 to 3 minutes, tell us why you're here and what you do with respect to violence and community safety.
Thank you to Nick. Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I actually wanted to begin with a moment of silence for Fabian Mendez, Marcus Wilson, and all the victims of violence in our community and in our city. Thank you. So again, my name is Zeke Cohen, represent District 1 on the City Council. Very proud to represent Highlandtown. And let me start by saying that the violence we have experienced as a community is unacceptable, and it is going to take all of us working together as a community to end it. Let me be clear, my office is all in for Highlandtown, the Baltimore Highlands, and all of our adjoining neighborhoods. This is one of my favorite parts of Baltimore. I live near here. My daughter and I walk around almost every day, at least once a week, and we are completely committed to this neighborhood. So what has my office been doing? Every month for the past few years, we've convened a meeting that is focused entirely on improving safety and well-being in the Baltimore Highlands corridor. We bring together agencies like DPW, BPD, State's Attorney's Office, Housing, and others, with nonprofits like Southeast CDC and other community organizations and neighbors. We take a harm reduction approach to the people struggling with addiction and the women doing sex work. We take a law enforcement approach to traffickers and anyone committing acts of violence. This group contributed to a major takedown of a sex trafficking ring on Mount Clair Street, where undocumented women were being trafficked. We've supported multiple community cleanups. We had an alley camera placed in one of our dirtiest alleys for a while to catch illegal dumping. We have been able to bring resources to the area. Most recently, we created a partnership with Baltimore Safe Haven to do direct street outreach to women and other folks participating in sex work. We believe that by meeting people where they are and not marginalizing them any further, we can help them get connected to housing, healthcare, jobs, and treatment. Although the city government does not control the police department, and we will not arrest our way out of this issue, we do have a great working partnership with Southeast BPD, and we're on the phone all the time. And we see them having a role, as well as our state's attorney, in prosecuting against trafficking and violent crime. Finally, in 2020, we passed the first law in the country to comprehensively legislate trauma-informed care throughout city government. The reality is that trauma fuels violence, and violence fuels trauma. Until we address the underlying cause, we'll remain trapped in a game of cat and mouse. My office is interested and always willing to partner with community. I will say this, we need more participation. When we hold our monthly meetings on the corridor, we often have more government representatives than community members. That needs to increase. I also want to say this, we need to see a more diverse representation of this community in community association spaces. When I look at the crime data, the vast majority of victims of the recent surge in violence have been Hispanic. Yet when I look around at some of our community spaces, that is often not the community that is represented. We need to have Spanish language translation. I believe this town hall should have Spanish language translation. We need to really be more inviting of our immigrant neighbors. And we have Juan from my office, who's our manager of immigrant affairs, and is happy to support. Let me just end on this note. The violence is unacceptable. And in crisis moments, it can feel easy to feel down, but let's not lose sight of the amazing, vibrant, diverse, funky nature of Highlandtown. We've seen an enormous amount of growth and economic development, even amidst the pandemic. These are some of the most eclectic, urbane, cosmopolitan neighborhoods in Baltimore. We have a lot of work to do in Highlandtown, but this is an amazing community, and my full commitment is to push with every resource we have for safety for every single individual that lives and works here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Cohen. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. Just before we head over to Madam State's Attorney Mosby, let me just mention that I definitely encourage everyone participating in this call to share their thoughts and feelings, and whether you came here because you're upset or afraid or concerned, I want you to share that tonight. But when we're all done, following up on Councilmember Cohen's thoughts, we're in this together as a community, and the reason we're having this call is because we're looking for solutions and investment and engagement in Highlandtown and Baltimore Highlands, because we all live here and we want it to be better for all of us. So regardless of your reason for coming, I hope you choose to stay and engage with us in our efforts to make the community a safer place. So if you take anything away from tonight, please take away the fact that we're interested in doing just that, making Highlandtown stronger together. And with that, Madam State's Attorney, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to present in front of the community. I want to thank each and every one of you, especially Councilman Cohen, who we work with directly out of my office. I want to just first and foremost say thank you to this community. You have a very unique community, and your vigilance and your observance and your engagement. I said it before when I was on a call with just a smaller committee, that if we had the same sort of dynamic and engagement that we have in Highlandtown and every community throughout Baltimore City, we'd be better off. And so I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to be able to present, because there's a great deal of misinformation about some of our new, well, not really new, but policies that we've had in existence for the past year. And so before I get into that, I wanted to just acknowledge Janice Bledsoe, who is my chief of my major crimes division. She's on the call. She has some data at some point we'll get to that we'll be able to present to you about crime trends that are actually happening in your neighborhood. Michael Collins, who is my strategic policy and planning director, is on the call to talk about some of our policies. Reginald Williams, who is the director for our community engagement, is also on the call. Dwayne Johnson, who is your community liaison, and one of the most important roles in my office, and that they're not only the face of the office into the community, but the voice of the community back to the office. And we have also Professor Susan Sherman on the line from Johns Hopkins, who will talk to you some more about the data that we relied on in formulating our policies. So when we talk about public safety, this is so incredibly important. And having worked with 5 police commissioners in 6 years and 4 mayors, what we need in the city of Baltimore is stability. And so I think that we have that. And so that's reflective in the data. We have my office has a great working relationship with the Baltimore Police Department. And I just wanted to remind you all that during this global pandemic, an administrative order came out on March 13th of last year, which announced statewide closure of the courts, and for only limited purposes were the courts open. We have no jury trials. The circuit court was closed to the public. There were very limited sort of motions that were being virtually heard. And so the work still continues, right? And you talk about violent crime, and again, Jan will go into that a little bit later on some of your questions, but that has been our focus. We, for far too long, have been focusing our small number of resources on these low-level offenses that don't have anything to do with public safety. And what the courts have done in the past year, we're going to have a backlog of cases, because as of 2020, the cases shut down, and we had pending cases from 2019. We have cases that occurred in 2020, and now we have cases from 2021. And so what they've started to do is to prioritize the incarcerated cases, individuals that are incarcerated, as well as homicides and shootings. They are only setting in 4 cases a week. And this is important because coming out of this pandemic, we have to be really careful about and prioritize our resources, right? The courts are doing it. We want to do the same thing. And so one of the things when you talk about, the need to prioritize violent crime, I think it's really important for you all to understand prior to 2020, which was the global pandemic, does not a really good indication of what we've been doing in our office. Other than the fact that, in 2019, we had a 90% felony conviction rate, homicide, 81% conviction rate, a major investigations unit that focuses on criminal enterprises, 98% conviction rate, our gun violence enforcement division, where we had police officers that were housed in our office, that was a 91% conviction rate. Our narcotics unit, there's been a great deal of misinformation about open air drug markets and whether or not we're prosecuting drug dealers. We absolutely are, and I'll get into that later. But we had a 98% conviction rate. Our special victims unit that focuses on sexual assault and child abuse and domestic violence cases. Unfortunately, during this global pandemic, we've seen a drastic sort of increase in domestic violence cases. We had a 96% conviction rate. So 9 times out of 10, would the police officers get the bad guys off the street? And I have the most talented prosecutors in the entire country, and the hurdles that we're up against in the city of Baltimore and the home of witness intimidation, where the stop snitching mentality began, are unprecedented. Yet and still, we are able to secure these convictions. And I tell you all that because as was highlighted by Councilman Cohen, you all, the community, that engagement, you all are the most important stakeholders in the criminal justice system, right? Like, when a 14-year-old is shot in broad daylight and we can't get any sort of communal cooperation, that's problematic. Police can't get them. I can't prosecute, my prosecutor. And so those individuals stay on our streets. And so that is really where our focus is going to be, has been, and will continue to be. And so before I go into any other questions and respond to you, and we'll do that, we'll talk about the data, we'll talk about the policies. I need you all to understand that victim crimes, so whether that's packaging theft, car theft, are a priority and have been a priority for my office. When it comes to open air drug markets, it's completely unacceptable. They fuel the violence in our city. Going after bad guys and convicting those bad guys, when we had the public enemy number ones, we convicted every single one of them with the exception of 2. And of those 16 individuals, they were serving cumulatively 7 life sentences plus 400 years in prison. So we'll get into the specifics of the policy, but when it comes to violent crime, I always say this, I live in the heart of West Baltimore. I don't have to turn on the news and open up the newspaper to see the violence plaguing my community. All I have to do is open up the door. And so I'm here, I'm fully vested, and we want to talk about solutions. I'm all for it.
Outstanding. Madam State's Attorney, thank you so much. I really appreciate those opening comments. All right, next I'd like to introduce Senator Bill Ferguson and ask him to speak for 2 to 3 minutes about his thoughts and focus on violence in our community and in Maryland in general. And after that, I intend to dig into the list of questions that we took up front. So Senator Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Nick, and appreciate my colleagues in government sort of laying out some of the other issues. Look, let me just sort of start with a baseline that I'm so exhausted by these conversations because we just have not been able to turn a corner. And it feels like this conversation continues to happen in waves, and particularly when it comes to May in the spring and to October in the fall. It is just, we have not hit a level of sustainable crime reduction. And I say that because I spend probably more time on issues of crime and law enforcement than any other policy issue. And that's not necessarily the rationale for why I wanted to get into elected office. But my frustration is probably pales in comparison to yours, because at the end of the day, every single one of us from every single community in the city deserves to live in a place where we feel safe. That should be a fundamental baseline standard that we should expect every single day. That's not the reality, and it's not the reality for many, many communities. Highlandtown has seen an acute increase in the last few months, and I think there's a lot of reasons why that may be. I want to just a couple of things. We have done a number of different legislative initiatives. This last year, we just overrode the governor's veto of the PROTECT Act, which brings state police to Monitor 83 to get BPD officers into community policing roles. We've done a number of things to help make sure that the resources are available, that there's an actual crime plan in place that's being followed. None of it has yielded the results that I think I hoped, or any of us hoped, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it had worked. But when it comes to violence, I think it's really, really important. And I say this as a community member myself, not all crime is the same. And when we think about the strategies for reducing crime, what is a carjacking is one strategy. I see Major Hopkins here on the reduction of carjackings is one particular strategy. The reduction of juvenile crimes and the grab and go crimes, that's a different strategy. Gun violence, a different strategy. And the key is stability and a clear plan that outlines what the police department and collateral agencies are doing in collaboration to address specific identified problems. there is not a overall violence reduction. That does not exist. It will not exist. It takes specific articulated data and plans that have to be implemented on an every single day basis. The data details what resources are needed. The oversight and making sure that it's being done is the absolute glue that keeps it together. I think the state's attorney said it well. Having 5 commissioners in a matter of 5 years, I think, has been a big driver of a lot of the changes. That's also 4 mayors, I think, in as many years. There is stability at this point, but it is going to take a consistent, clear, articulated vision around which problem we are trying to solve. If it's about gun violence, it's one thing. If it's about burglaries, it's another. And so I think as questions come up, it's very important to articulate the specific problem at hand. Final thing I want to point out is I don't want to underestimate the impact of the pandemic and all of the collateral effects. And I say this because, unfortunately, in the city, this is not a new conversation. But what I hear from my colleagues across the state is that it is a new conversation for them. And they are seeing levels of violence in communities that traditionally have not seen levels of violence. And so what is happening on a sociological level because of this pandemic, I don't know that we can identify clearly, but I think it is very much the case that it is having an impact in a multitude of ways. I think the courts being shut down has also had an impact on this. And, we're going to be trying to work through it for this, probably the next 3 years of trying to work through the backlogs, build the systems to work on diversionary opportunities to make sure that those who are repeat violent offenders pay the consequences. But it is not one single strategy. And I so desperately wish there were something I could say that would make it feel like it could get better. But this is a long road ahead, and it's going to take collaboration of all of the parts of the criminal justice system with articulated solutions around identified problems. Oh, and also I just want to say, I know that Brooke is joining, Delegate Learman's joining. I know Delegate Lewis is I think she's unable to make it tonight. And Delegate Clipper's trying to join, but we are all going to be sharing. So I have to run at 7:40, but Delegate Learman will be bouncing in. But please know that we are tracking this every single day. And we're here to do whatever we possibly can to be of assistance.
Outstanding. Thanks, Senator Ferguson. Greatly appreciated. All right. Before we go into the pre-submitted questions, are there any other elected officials on the call presently who want to be included in the distribution of questions or want to make an introductory statement? If yes, please put something in chat right now. We've already agreed that when Delegate Learman joins in about 20 minutes, we'll let her team or her chime in and talk about her perspective and stance on the violence in the community. Corey Ramos, you're up.
You're on mute. You're muted, ma'am.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Corey Ramos. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Affairs for the City Council President's Office. On the line tonight, I have myself, and I also have your liaison for your area, Shakira Gill. She will be the one attending your meetings. And we also have our Director of Community Affairs, Derek Green, on the line. Just wanted to acknowledge that we're here. The council office does not have direct purview over issues related to crime. However, our office does work with and support the efforts of the Baltimore City Police Department, the mayor's office, the state's attorney's office, and residents. Excuse me, I have allergies going on this evening. The council, had held many community meetings with Chairman Conway, who is the chair of Public Safety and Government Operations Committee regarding public safety. His committee has held 9 hearings to date, with more hearings to come. Just wanted to acknowledge that we're here. Our contact information has been put in the chat, and we're here to support the community and to take part and to also be part of some focus groups or any ways to come to solutions with our agencies and the community. So thank you for having us.
Outstanding, Ms. Ramos, and thanks for that introduction. Thanks for being here. All right, I saw that Delegate Clippinger dropped in, and I'm going to ask him to hang on just for a few minutes. And when we introduce Delegate Learman, we will introduce Delegate Clippinger at the same time. What I'd like to do now is transition briefly, if we can, to the first of our pre-submitted questions. All right, so, and I'm going to make my level best effort to direct these questions that were submitted in advance to the appropriate official, and I will just invite our other elected officials to chime in if they feel like they are better suited to answer that question or also want to take a stab at it. And with that, question number one, State's Attorney Mosby, what is being done to address crime in the area around Conkling and Baltimore streets? We see prostitution, drug dealing, and usage, etc., in broad daylight every day.
So thank you for the question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to respond. So first and foremost, understanding the need to focus on victim and violent crime. Last year, and I just want to set the record straight so everybody's clear on what the policies are. During the global pandemic in March of last year, we underwent somewhat of an experiment out of my office with the criminal justice system. We consulted with public health experts to slow the spread of COVID-19 in prisons and in jails in order to minimize the public exposure as well as the police exposure to individuals that would be cycled in and out of the jail within a matter of 24 hours. And we decided in March of last year that we would stop prosecuting low-level offenses that we believed in theory had nothing to do with public safety. So that it was inclusive of drug possession, paraphernalia, prostitution, trespassing, minor traffic offenses, open container, rogue, and vagabond. In addition to enumerating those offenses, we dismissed over 1,400 of those cases that were open and pending. We quashed and eliminated over 1,400 of those types of warrants that were of those same aforementioned offenses. We encouraged the governor to reduce the prison population, which resulted in 2 executive orders. And we redefined our approach to bail on 2 occasions. Now, the data, and Susan Sherman, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins, is on the line if you had any sort of specific questions for her around the data. But the data and the results are what we were incredibly encouraged by, right? The overall, in the past year, the overall incarceration rate as a direct result of our policies, the population in Baltimore City jails was down by 20%. There was a 39% reduction in the number of individuals that were going in and out of the jails. There was an 80% reduction in drug arrests. And thanks to the stability, as Senator has already spoken about, there was an 80% reduction in drug arrests, but it was thanks to the stability of the police department and the leadership of Commissioner Harrison and his command staff that, unlike, as Senator Ferguson was already talking about, unlike 63 of the 66 other major municipalities in the country, our violent crime, excluding non-fatal shootings and homicides, I'm talking about carjackings, armed robberies, victim crimes, our violent crime went down for the first time by 20%. Our property crime went down overall citywide by 36%. Of the 1,500 individuals that we quashed their warrants or eliminated their warrants or dismissed their cases, only 5 of those individuals actually recidivated, right? That's 0.04% when the statewide recidivism rate is about 40%. And even in the 911 calls, significantly, and which this is important because it's a proxy to the public concern around drug use and public intoxication and sex work, even those calls went down by 33% and a 50% reduction in calls mentioning sex work compared to the past 2 years. So what we determined based on that data, and I'm in no way, form, or fashion attributing that decline in crime to my policies. Again, that's to the credit of the police department. But those small, low-level offenses never had anything to do with public safety, right? We've been, for decades, incarcerating individuals and defaulting to just arresting individuals for open container. And what I'm saying and what we're proposing is that this is counterproductive. Now that we have stability within the police department, it's counterproductive to the very limited resources that we have in law enforcement. Let's focus on violent crime. We're still only solving 1 out of 4 homicides a year. That means 3 out of 4 murderers are still out on the street committing murders. And so what we are attempting to do and saying, let's not focus on open containers. I want my police, they're not social workers. Let's ensure that they're responding to 14-year-olds that are being shot in broad daylight when we have no communal support, and not to the open container where somebody is suffering from a behavioral health issue and substance use disorder, right? And so it's a different approach in that what I've done is to say what we were doing in COVID based upon the data, the empirical data that you can't really dispute, is to make that permanent. We want to utilize our resources and do what the court is doing. When we go into court for 4 trials a week, we want to focus on violent crime. And so that's what we're attempting to do. And this idea, and the question was about drug distribution. I want to be very clear that my office still prosecutes drug distribution and possession with intent to distribute. As long as there is an articulated, meaning it's written in a statement of probable cause, or the officer is able to testify in court to the indicia of distribution. What does the indicia of distribution? Well, we base that off of a legal standard. And what that means is as long as they're able to tell you that there are scales, that there's cash, there's distribution packaging, there's the surveillance of a hand-to-hand transaction. We are prosecuting drug dealers. And so I want to be really clear about that. What we're not doing is assigning an arbitrary number of the amount for the prosecution of drug dealers. Because if we set an arbitrary number and we say that person has to have 9 pieces of drugs, what do you think the drug dealers are going to do? They're going to ensure that they have 8 pieces.
Pardon me, madam.
So that's what I want to be very clear about that. And with regard
Madam State's Attorney.
Yes.
Please, if I may interrupt for a moment, please.
Yes.
What I'd like to do is just, if I can briefly redirect. So just looking at the comments and kind of trying to parse the meeting in a number of these, recognizing that no one is specifically interested in a high number of arrests or even a police intervention. Can you talk specifically about what's being done in this part of town, in that specific intersection, or in Highlandtown in general, to address those behaviors that are happening with like the drug dealing and the prostitution? It looks like the folks are interested in hearing what is being done, not what's not being done.
So I think it's important, before we go into what is being done, for you all to understand that what our policies are, right? So that was a point in me trying to outline what our policies actually entail, which is inclusive of going after drug dealers. So if you have drug dealers in your community and there's an open air drug market, we are working with the police department to ensure that we're getting those individuals off your streets. When it comes to sex trafficking, right? And I want to be really clear about this. The policy does not preclude more serious charges such as human trafficking, pimping, sexual assault, physical assault, or the purchase of sex from minors or trafficked persons. The charges that the policy covers are misdemeanors. And there was a question, and I believe it's either the second or third question, about felonies pertaining to prostitution. The mere prostitution is a misdemeanor. Misdemeanor under state law. When sex workers fear prosecution, they are significantly less likely to report serious crime such as sexual assault, physical assault, or human trafficking. So those are the crimes that, from an office perspective, that we're working with the police department, that we're committed to pursuing. And we want sex workers to be able to report those crimes to law enforcement without the fear that we'll turn around and prosecute them. And so, again, I want to be clear about what we are and we are not prosecuting. We're prosecuting human trafficking, right? And we're prosecuting sex offenses against minors. What we're not prosecuting are these low-level behavioral health issues. And what was part of the announcement was that we have partnered with the Baltimore Crisis Response Incorporated, who is on this call tonight if you all have questions, right? Deanna is on the call, where they're going to provide 24-hour crisis response teams. We've partnered with sex worker organizations where they're going to respond to meet the behavioral needs of not only the individual, but also the community.
Hey, Nick, I see in the chat room that there's a lot of questions about data. And I actually did some data research on both Baltimore Highlands and Highland Town. So I will be happy.
Please.
It's again, a PowerPoint, and I will be happy to show. I did some comparisons between January, February, March of this year and last year. We did yearly crimes from 2019 to 2020. So tell me when you're ready for that, because I think that will address all of your, at least your data questions specific to Highlandtown and Baltimore Highlands.
Thanks, Janice. Let's shoot for 8 o'clock sharp. I just made you a co-host, so when the time comes, we can do screen sharing. And in the interim, I'd like to open the floor for at least one follow-up question for Madam State's Attorney Mosby. And then I'd like to go back to the list for a question for Senator Ferguson before he has to leave. Any questions from the floor for State's Attorney Mosby? Art.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Madam State Attorney, and all of the elected officials. I'm actually an investor in Highlandtown, and I'm very happy to be there. Recently, one of my tenants left, so I was fixing up the property and so on and so forth. And I cannot begin. I live here in Canton, so it's about 5 minutes away. I cannot begin to tell you what deteriorating situation I found. Open market drug dealing, prostitution in the open. I mean, this is disaster. It's a disgrace. It's a disaster for all of our elected officials. And I know that in Los Angeles, they're doing a recall of the state attorney and others in California. I just don't know to what extent, how many more people have to be killed for our state attorney and other officials understand that what you guys are doing is not working. The process, and I'm sorry, I'm being honest. I worked in the federal government. I was in the U.S. Congress as a staffer for 27 years. I retired 5 years ago, and if my former boss did not produce, she would get fired. And what is going on right now is a disgrace. And we're here in Baltimore, my wife and I, because my son is very sick, and we're here because of Johns Hopkins. And I decided to start investing here in real estate. And let me tell you that my tenants are scared. They're very, very scared. And I appreciate you being here, because being here is a first step. But whatever you guys are doing now is not working. Perhaps it's a pandemic, but not prosecuting prostitutes that are providing services in front of the kids. The kids are right there playing, and the prostitutes are right there, and the drug dealings as well. What kind of example are we setting our children? And whatever data you're going to have, I don't know. But anyways, I'm sorry, Nick. Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'd like to give...
thank you for your perspective, and I appreciate it. You're absolutely right, Art. What we've been doing for decades prior to this past year has not been working. It has not made us any safer. And what we've been doing for the past few decades is thinking that we can default to just arresting our way out of the situation, right? And thinking that having to work with 5 police commissioners in 4 years, arresting our way out of the situation is going to actually work. It hasn't. And so that's the reason for this policy, right? That I can just be candid with you. Those that are performing sex acts are not the ones committing murders. The ones committing murders, the reason why we have a solve rate of only 1 out of 4, meaning 3 out of 4 individuals are not being prosecuted and are still on the streets of Baltimore City committing these heinous murders, is because we've been focusing for far too long, for decades, as you've indicated. It hasn't worked. We've been focusing for decades on these low-level offenses that have nothing to do with public safety, which would be inclusive of prostitution. As I indicated to you, right, these are individuals with substance use disorder. Who is best? The police are not social workers, right? They don't have the experience and the expertise to be able to respond to someone who's suffering from homelessness or mental health illnesses, right? The police should be responding to public safety issues. And that is what we are attempting to do differently with this policy, is to say, let's use our resources to focus on violent crime and violent criminals coming out of the pandemic, where they're only scheduling 4 cases a week in the courts. Let's go after bad guys. Let's allow the behavioral health specialists to be able to, with their expertise, respond to the social and behavioral needs of those individuals so we can get to the root causes. Because you are absolutely right, Art. What we've been doing for the past few decades has not worked. Not for the past year, but for the past few decades.
What was that part of the mandate from the Justice Department on the police reform for the city of Baltimore?
Actually, that's a great question. Yes, to be honest with you, that's part of the consent decree, for them to stop looking at these low-level offenses and spending their time, their resources, their energy on these low-level offenses. Let's go after the bad guys. Let's solve some of these homicides, right? My prosecutors have on average 54 cases, actually 87 when you consider the inactive cases. The national average for a homicide prosecutor, you should have 20. Like, let me divert some of my resources from district court, where we're prosecuting open containers, to you as a police officer responding to the 14-year-old that last week was shot in broad daylight. I need you to solve that. And so that is the point of these policies. We need to be smart about the resources that we're using, and we need to prioritize. And that's what we're attempting to do. We need to be innovative. We need to do things differently. We haven't done things differently in decades.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. This is exactly why we're having this conversation. I'm grateful for your engagement. I know Senator Ferguson is time constrained, and I'd like to pose a question to him to talk about what happens at the state level before he has to leave. So if I may, Senator Ferguson, Elizabeth, who is on this call, submitted the question via our online form. Crime and violence are the result of lack of access to resources and opportunities. Increased police presence and harsher sentencing are band-aids that do not address the cause of the problem. What is being done at the state level to address this? What can we as citizens do? And that question is also, of course, available to our city leaders when the time comes. But Senator Ferguson, if you would, please.
Yeah, so I would say, look, I largely agree. I think that it's easy politics to say you enhance sentences and therefore we're dealing with violent crime. None of those enhanced sentences matter if you don't get a conviction, if you don't have an arrest. And if you don't have an arrest, if you don't have somebody coming forward to be a witness, and 90% of cases are solved by an eyewitness. If you don't have an eyewitness and you don't have other evidence, you don't have an arrest and you don't have a conviction. So the enhanced penalty may make for a good headline. I don't know that I've seen that it has actually made for a strong reduction. Now, that said, should somebody that is a repeat violent offender that's creating violence and havoc over and over again be sentenced and punished? Without a doubt, no question. What are we trying to do at the state level? Look, there's a number of different methods that we've been trying, and some are new. Some I actually have a lot of hope for. They're not going to be overnight fixes. The one that I have the most hope for is this program that is it's called BRIC, and now I'm blanking on what the exact acronym is for. It's the hospitals who are putting together emergency petition teams. They're hospital teams that will be on a 24/7 basis that will be available to deal with crisis intervention. This is being funded through hospital rates. It is a very different approach to dealing with substance abuse and mental health breakdowns. I think that this has been a largely absent policy area for well too long. I have a lot of hope that the hospital engagement in this, that they are doing some serious thinking and work to pilot this program in Baltimore. We're putting an additional $20 million out this year to make sure that this program can move as fast as possible. But I want to be honest, this is something that probably is not available for the next 8 months or so. We did put another $45 million into emergency health and substance abuse treatment as a result of the pandemic. This was something that the legislature did with Governor Hogan immediately when we got in the first 3 weeks. We knew that the mental health crisis is very, very real. And so there are more providers on the street available today than there have ever been in the state of Maryland. It's still not enough. But I do want to make one other final point. I think there's other parts of data from the last year. And let me just take, for example, domestic violence and child abuse. The number of reported domestic violence and child abuse has plummeted over the last 12 months. Sadly, we know that domestic violence and child abuse has not gone away. What we know is that it's not here, or it's not being reported. And so I think this is the part of sort of the post-pandemic. I mean, the good news is the light is at the end of the tunnel of this period in the next few months, I hope and pray. But I think there's a lot of pent up challenges, and we have put significant resources, thanks to the Biden administration and Congress. They allowed us to put $3.9 billion into the social safety net. I think a lot of that will help on the sort of root causes of crime stuff. I don't think that necessarily solves the individual that is holding people up or going to a dice game and shooting somebody because of cash on the ground. And so that is a different strategy. And that's why I think when I started at the beginning, we have to be very clear about what problem it is we are trying to solve, because when we talk about crime, we lump it all together. And that is the most dangerous thing to do, because crime is very specific. It's crimes of opportunity versus crimes of planning, crimes with victims, crimes without victims. And they all take a very different strategy. At the state level, we've tried to make sure that the resources are there. But these are not immediate quick fixes.
Outstanding. Thank you, Senator Ferguson. And thanks for joining us tonight. I understand your time.
I'm so sorry that I have to leave. My colleagues will do infinitely better than I. They are in this as much. So please be in touch. And Tyler from my office is here. I'm sorry that I have to run, but we'll be available at any time.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do next is allow Delegate Clippinger to take the same question and introduce himself.
Hi, good evening. I'm Luke Clippinger. I'm one of your members of the House of Delegates, along with Robin Lewis and Delegate Brooke Learman, who just joined us here a moment ago. I am the chair of the House Judiciary Committee in the House of Delegates, and I just finished my third year as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. Bill did point to, and I'm gonna go a little deeper on the GBRICS program. There's a lot that the state is doing related to particularly getting services to people with mental health issues so that they can avoid police contact, and by avoiding police contact, allow those police officers to engage in work that's more important for addressing issues related to violent crime. GBRICS, as the senator mentioned, will put $45 million of hospital fees into a fund in 4 counties, in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Carroll County, and Howard County, to not only create new crisis intervention teams. We actually have across the state in a couple of our counties some of the better crisis intervention teams, but we also we don't have them really in a coordinated way, in a way that coordinates with hospitals. So for a brief moment, when somebody's in a mental health crisis, usually the police are called, they're sent to the scene, they stabilize the scene, but then if the person is deemed by the officer in need of an emergency assessment, they get to go to the hospital and sit with them for 5 or 6 hours. And about 60% about 60% of the time, it results in the hospital saying this person doesn't actually need mental health care or treatment. We've lost 6 hours of the police officer's time, put them in an emergency room where they didn't need to be in the first place. Because a police officer can't be expected to have the service, to have the skill to be able to identify the specific mental health triggers that might be going on. So what GBRICS is going to do is it's going to take that money and set up a care traffic control system where people will be included in that system if they have contact with mental health systems, so that police officers can engage and say, okay, here's somebody who is in need generally of mental health assistance. Where are they on the continuum of care? Who can we put there that they need to connect with in order to get them off the police officers' hands and get them onto mental health, the mental health that they need. This is one of the small things, and it's not a small thing, it's a $45 million thing, that we can go forward to help police officers better target their time so that they can target issues related to violent crime and particularly related to gun crime. In the legislature, we also, one of the other issues we deal with is we deal with a lot of issues related to gun violence, and part of the challenge that we identified in last year's session that was that we needed to get a better sense from start to finish of what happens when a gun crime is initially arrested all the way through to the time that the gun crime is actually prosecuted. I think one of the things that we need to, if I might be so bold, look at in this particular area, we've talked a lot about data, is the number of arrests for gun crimes that have occurred in these areas and the number of prosecutions that have occurred for gun crime, and particularly in the area between Fayette and I'll say Fayette, Pratt, and Haven and Clinton Streets. I think we need to take a look at that at that area, because I think we also need to start looking at the specific people who are engaged in those crimes. I believe what we've tried to do in Annapolis is support the police department as they've gone through the consent decree process, and as they have been training officers to do a better job themselves. We also need that consent decree process to continue forward so that they can properly investigate these gun crimes as they occur. One of the other issues, and I'll touch on this and then I will stop, that we attempted to deal with this in the last year, we were successful in getting more money for violence interruption, particularly through the program called ROCA, that use cognitive behavioral therapies to address juveniles who have come into the juvenile justice system, violent acts, and those programs have helped pull some kids off the brink of committing violent crimes, but also have worked with kids who have committed violent crimes to keep them from coming back again. We were able to get funding in this year's session. We also, however, need to continue work to reform the juvenile justice system, and it's something that I've worked on for many years. We got closer this year to real substantive change on that score, but ultimately we're going to have to come back in the next session and work on that again. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I know that Delegate Learman is here, and I'm also happy to defer.
Thanks a bunch, Luke. Really appreciated. Let's open up the floor for a question. Anything for Delegate Clippinger or any of our other elected officials? Anyone want to raise their hand and jump in with a question? Otherwise, Jay Steinmetz, go for it.
So, I mean, I think you may have answered this, but I mean, you know, I run a business obviously in Highlandtown, and we're seeing a lot of drug addicts just walk up and use our building as a toilet, and it's disgusting. And people are checking the door handles on all the cars. If this is not a crime, do we still call the police? I mean, what's the protocol, and how are we educating people to know what the protocol is? Because, you know, we can't continue to have this. I can't get anybody to work in our facility because people don't want to be in Highlandtown because of the stuff, the stories that are coming out of the groups of people that work at my company. So, I mean, we're trying to get more people. I guess the question I have is, you tell me what to do. When I've got a guy who's obviously there and he's defecating on the side, do I call the police? Do they pull him in? Do they bring medical help? Do I call a special number for healthcare to bring somebody to take him in? Will he go voluntarily? Is that how does it work? What is the protocol?
So if I could just interject, and thank you for your question. I appreciate it. I know that you have a genuine concern for your business and your community. The one thing I would say is that, yes, you should still call the police. And the mayor has given me the permission to let you know that they have been exploring and are looking to create ways in which they can divert the 911 calls directly to those behavioral health organizations. So right now, the way that it works, and BCRI is on the call if you had any questions specifically for them, is that the BPD, when you call BPD or Baltimore Police Department, they will refer those individuals to the Baltimore Crisis Response Incorporated, as opposed to just arresting them, right? They will call BCRI to come out, and BCRI will then engage those individuals to try to meet the needs of the individual and, of course, the needs of the community. BCRI provides 24-hour crisis response teams that will be able to respond. Deanna, did you want to chime in at all? So, and just to add that this exploration of diverting those calls is something that is in motion as we speak. So you can continue to call the police, and hopefully very soon, I'm told, it will be diverted automatically to those behavioral health organizations.
Can a BCRI representative be at the scene across the entire city of Baltimore in the speed and the time frame that somebody who's socially right in? I mean, there's community policing going on.
Yes, sir. Yes,
right.
sir. Yes, sir. And that's why they're on the call.
Yeah,
that's the organization that the mayor's office is looking to work with and to be able to divert those calls for.
So,
Thank you.
So my name is Dina. I'm with Baltimore Crisis Response. Thank you, State's Attorney Mosby. Yes, BCRI is partnering with the State's Attorney's Office. We've been around since 1992. We're the only behavioral health crisis response program in the city. However, all that being said, our resources are limited. You mentioned GBRICS. That's a regional crisis response program that is going to be built over 5 years. We've expanded our services. We're now 24/7, but we respond to not only the individuals in the city, but also to the 11 hospitals that we divert from. But the first start of all of our services, when 911 diversion starts, where they're going to be sending more calls to Baltimore Crisis Response hotline, the Here to Help hotline, that's where everything will start. So our hotline counselors will talk to those individuals, figure out what we can do. Maybe they don't need a crisis team. Maybe they need a linkage to care. Maybe they need to get into a medical detox or an outpatient appointment. We can start that conversation and that process.
So you're going to have somebody showing up on site when this person's there? Like, when I call the police, they come within a certain period of time. So you have representatives in vehicles ready to show up, because it's not like I'm going to hand a phone to a guy who's a drug addict who's defecating next to my building. He's probably not going to be there for more than 20 minutes. We spot him, we call him. I want to call the police. Are the police going to be able to have somebody from the crisis helpline to come over there to apprehend this guy, to bring him in, to say, hey, we're here to give you some help?
So let me just be clear, and I think it's a valid question. The police are the ones that are making the referral. The police are the ones that are making the calls. So you do exactly what you've always been doing, which is call the police. Okay. The only difference in the response is that person won't automatically be arrested.
Yeah,
okay?
That's fine.
So that's the difference. And they're going to be making the referral to BCRI until that automatic sort of diversion is put into place. And when that automatic diversion is put into place, I imagine that more resources will be coming out of the mayor's office in order to support it.
Outstanding. Thank you both, Mr. Steinmetz and Ms. Mosby. I appreciate you with the question and the succinct response. I'd like to now switch over to Mark Parker, who has a question. And I just want to indicate that later in the call, I'm going to come back to your question, Jay, and ask Councilman Cohen to talk about other things he's doing in the neighborhood to improve conditions and generally make sure we've got a livable community. But for now, Mark Parker, you're on.
Thank you, Nick. A delegate Clippinger, you were speaking about ROCA. I've heard good things about ROCA's work here in the city. I'd love to know a little bit more about them. Specifically, I know Ms. Bledsoe mentioned that's for 19 years old and older. So I guess I have two questions. One is, how does ROCA get involved or become involved in a community, and what does that involvement look like, or is it kind of a case-by-case basis when they're called in across the city? Just break down a little bit more for us how the program works, and how it might apply here to our young friends. The second part, of course, is that you know, we certainly have plenty of young folks under the age of 19 who are both victims of violence and unfortunately perpetrators of violence too, in some pretty tragic and heartbreaking cycles. And so in as much as ROCA isn't for older than that, or for that age group, I'm just wondering kind of what in particular, what resource, you mentioned juvenile justice, but I'm wondering in particular what resources are here, especially having two 16-year-olds and a 13-year-old girl arrested for murder in the last few weeks. It really brings that to a head. I mean, that's just one case, but it's emblematic of the cycle of trauma and violence that Councilperson Cohen was speaking about with our young people.
Look, first of all, I'll give Delegate Learman a heads up. I'm going to yield to her because she's worked very hard in getting more money for violence interruption programs when she was a member of the Appropriations Committee, and then and ongoing. She's been a leader in working to assist programs like ROCA. Not to pick a fight with my friend from the State's Attorney's Office at all. There is some interaction between DJS, and it's recent. Some greater interaction between the Department of Juvenile Services and ROCA. They have started to work together in identifying kids who maybe are not in the adult system, but are in the juvenile system, but have committed serious crimes, and they've started to try and identify those kids and get them engaged in the program. There is a process by which ROCA works with the police department, state's attorney's offices, with a range of different people to start to identify specific people to participate in the program, and it has a decent success rate. It's a program that seeks to get in and use that cognitive behavioral therapy to address issues related to trauma, issues related to any number of different issues related to drug abuse, related to behavioral health, related to a range of different issues, to provide that kind of work of care and assistance that helps to redirect kids and adults more often. It is more often. It's been used with adults, but again, DJS now working with kids here with the program, redirecting them and moving them in a better path. The challenge there is an issue of scale. It's an issue of, you know, how many resources can we get in there? How many resources can we engage? And how many people can we direct into those programs to help do the substantive work when we have a lot of problems all the way across the city with this. And with that, if it's all right, Nick, I'd like to kick it to Delegate Learman to talk a little bit more about violence interruption. And we didn't plan this, I'm catching her a little off guard. So,
thank you.
Exactly. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Delegate Learman and State's Attorney Mosby. Great to see you, and Councilman Cohen. So I'll just put a little bit of this in maybe I'll sort of step back for 1 second and how I think about violence prevention and public safety, as I think of it on a continuum of three big steps. So the first is long-term, right? The investments in our public education system, investments in our transit system so people can get to jobs, investments in childcare. We used to be one of the states that paid the least amount for childcare vouchers, and we recently changed that in the past couple of years, so more people have access to better childcare around the city and around the state. So those are the long-term, right, approaches, like thoughts and where we need to be building, and that's why we passed the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It's why we just passed a huge bill to help fund MTA this year. It's why we did the childcare work and even more, right? And then there's the sort of near-term sort of prevention work. And that near-term prevention work is G-BRICS, it's behavioral health response, and it's the gun violence, the evidence-based, like public health oriented gun violence prevention programs that we've seen work around the country and in Baltimore. They have worked here in our district. We see in Cherry Hill, a neighborhood that 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even people, they talk about it as, there was multiple shootings all the time. It's incredibly dangerous. And, we've gone at various points, over a year without a single shooting in Cherry Hill because of the amazing Safe Streets program there and the great work that they're doing. So, there are ways and there are groups that work. So, and then I'll say the third step would be the public safety response, right? After a crime happens, the police and the state's attorney. So my focus, has been on the first two. And I think our whole delegation's focus really, because we have to get those right because we want to prevent the crime from happening in the first place. And then I leave it to State's Attorney Mosby and our police and our great police commissioner to help, and we support their efforts on the third step. But that middle step, that near term, is the one that I've spent a lot of time trying to understand and focusing on. So in 2018, we passed HB 432, which for the first time created a state level fund to fund these gun violence prevention programs, to fund ROCA, to fund Safe Streets, to fund hospital-based intervention programs like at Shock Trauma and up at Life Bridge and Mount Sinai. So now we have a way to start funding those programs. But like Luke said, the problem has been scale, because the first year we got $5 million in, and after that, there was no more fund. Like, the governor didn't put any more funding in. And so last year we passed a bill again to mandate $3 million a year for it. That bill was vetoed. And so this year we overrode that veto. But what that means is that there's no money in FY22 in that violence intervention and prevention fund because the governor didn't include it. So it's our goal going forward to really try to get more state dollars for those kinds of programs. So Safe Streets, so ROCA, so hospital-based intervention programs. So those types of programs can really scale up to where we need them to be. Oh, hold on one second. Okay, Liza. And I don't know if all of you saw, it was really exciting. Like 2 weeks ago, President Biden announced that one of his focuses on gun violence prevention is going to be investing in these exact programs. He's going to put billions of dollars into gun violence prevention programs like Safe Streets, like Ceasefire, these types of programs that really do have an evidence base. And we are in a really unique situation. We're one of only a handful of states that's ready to put in state applications for funding for that money, because we have this state violence, it's called Maryland VIP, Maryland Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. Because that's set up, we are ready to start trying to get more money from the federal government to do this work. Hold on one second. So I'm really excited about that program, and I know that those programs work, and that's what we need to be doing to make sure that we're investing in preventing crime. I mean, really, it's ROCA and it's working with the teenagers, but it's also Safe Streets and hospital-based programs. So sorry about.
If I could just interject really quickly, Nick, just to say, with the DJS system, I know that there's often
For the group, can you just clarify what DJS is again, please?
The Department of Juvenile Services, okay? DJS is what controls individuals that are younger than 18 years of age. And there's a misconception that it's the state's attorney that makes decisions about these young people. And unfortunately, it's not within our power or our purview. It's really within the purview of the governor, who controls the Department of Juvenile Services. You all are very lucky. You have Dwayne Johnson, who is a former regional representative for the Department of Juvenile Services, that can go over the specifics around what the breakdown, and I've been very vocal about the need to kind of reform Department of Juvenile Services, and been vocal about our governor attempting to help us in reforming the broken system of the juvenile justice system. But from a direct sort of perspective, one of the things that has been a priority for my office is to attempt to break that school to prison pipeline. And through various programs, we've been able to touch more than 7,000 young people just out of my office. Our junior state's attorney program, we've touched more than 257 young people. And I can tell you 95% of the young people who have gone through our 6-week program where we introduce them to the positive aspects of the criminal justice system. In the past 6 years, 95% of them have graduated from college. 95% of them, have graduated from high school. 95% of them are either in college or on a career track. And 33% of the individuals that are in college are pursuing a career in criminal justice. So that is very much a dedicated sort of priority for my office.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for that. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to take a question from the chat, consolidate a couple of questions from the chat, and direct it to an open floor and see which of our elected officials would like to address it. And then we're going to pivot back to Delegate Clippinger, who has a follow-up item he'd like to address. So there are at least a half dozen different comments circulating through the chat, and I think the thrust of them is specifically, is there any strategy to address open air drug markets, which is, I'm understanding from the chat, totally distinct from pursuing low-level individual possession charges. So let's agree that that's a separate thing. And 2, is there any strategy to address violence specifically linked to open air drug markets or drug trafficking now that resources have been freed by virtue of the non-prosecution strategy? And that is not necessarily just for you, Ms. State's Attorney, but anyone can take that, although I think you should probably start.
Yeah, I'll start. And so let me just be clear, and Jan, this is probably a great time for you to interject. We have what is called a crime strategies unit. It's a data-driven prosecution unit where oftentimes in law enforcement, you have these individuals and agencies that work in these silos. But what we attempt to do in this prosecutorial unit is to centralize that data and to develop strategies on how we can go after bad guys, right? Criminal enterprises. And so that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to present to you some of the crime trends that we've seen. And so, yes, we are prosecuting open air drug markets and drug dealers. We will work with the police department. Please give us that information. And whether you're giving it to Dwayne or Reginald or Jan Bledsoe, we use that information. We develop strategies on how we can develop long-term investigations on these bad guys, right? We don't want to necessarily just get a drug dealer that has one piece of heroin or one piece of fentanyl, because what will end up happening is that they'll be cycled in and out of the system and they'll be right back on a corner near you. What we need from the community is cooperation, collaboration, and that if you have surveillance videos, if you have information, one of the things that we did last year is we launched a second phase of You're Not Alone, Together We're Stronger campaign, where we included an anonymous tip line. An anonymous tip line where all you have to do is 1-877-SAO4-TIP. That information is provided to us. We can corroborate, meaning we can get additional evidence that will support that information that's not just relying on your tip, that will allow us to develop strategies to go after bad people. And that is inclusive of, again, open air drug markets and drug distributors in your community.
Outstanding. Any other takers?
Did I miss anything?
No, I do want to point out, because I'm reading the chats as it's going on. You guys understand that the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office cannot make an arrest. So when I see chats that say there's an open air drug market, look, we would love to prosecute that. But you have to, in order to prosecute, you have to have evidence. And in order to have evidence, people need to call the police and report what they see, whether it's taking a tag number down, whether it's your Ring video, whether it's your cell phone video. You need to provide evidence to go forward with the case. So, call the police, call me, text me, but call the police and tell them that you have evidence of an open air drug market. because we can't make the arrest, but we will work with the police to make a stronger case so that we're not just doing 1 pill or 2 pills. And, you know, Southeast has a great police district, period. They are very, very good, and we work well with them. In light of the shootings that happened last week, we have found information with the police about the shooting. We have followed up with the police about the shooting. Our GVED unit, which is our gun force enforcement unit, has been working with the police concerning the shooting. In addition to that, we also have another ASA who is assigned to the Southeast District. His name is Tyler Morrison, and you'll be meeting him shortly in the next couple months. But, you know, we can't make arrests, the police do. And we want to work with them, and they work well with us. So that's what we're asking.
So Major Hopkins here, just to kind of go off that as well. We do have a good working relationship. As Senator Ferguson alluded to earlier, there's different roles that we have to do, right? So patrol will respond to many of these calls. The base level, they do a lot of the referrals. They'll send the CDS information up to our district action team. They actually do the investigatory type of work, meaning that we've raided several homes in reference to drug dealers in that particular area. We've seized year to date so far 6 guns just between Baltimore and Lombard, 3400 block of Leverton. 3 of those guns come from that area. We are deployed there, but that's kind of what the detectives do on that route as far as the narcotics and even some of the prostitution. They'll forward up some of that information to these programs, diversion programs we're speaking of. And then we also have our district detective units, right? They investigate the shootings and follow up with homicide. So it is a multi-pronged approach. Some days we are extremely busy, but I think the detectives, the state's attorneys, all these diversion programs, the councilman's office, Learman's office, Cohen's office, we are working together. Sometimes it's not as immediate as we would like, but we do have great feedback from the community. Please keep pushing that information to my office. If you can't reach my detective unit, I think everyone on here has my direct contact. Forward me any videos. I'll make sure my detectives have that. So overall, we are doing good enforcement there. We are trying to make it a better investigatory type of a stance, right? So we can get the houses, we can get the guns, we can get the vehicles that are involved, and that's kind of where we're working at. So you don't see that as often as you would maybe 4 or 5 years ago with the misdemeanor arrest, but we are having significant improvement in work being done in these areas. So I just don't want that to go missed. I really want to let everyone know that we are together working to make this a better area. And we really do need everyone's involvement to send any video, any type of tips that you may think might not be important. It may be very important. So just forward that to the police department and we'll address it the best we can. So I just wanted to put that out there. And again, thank you to all the community members. You've been doing really well. The same thing we're doing here. I think this is our 3rd or 4th conversation. Madam Mosby's been here, most of the council folks. We also had the commander's meeting coming up this Wednesday. We'll go over the same thing. I think Bledsoe shall probably go over some statistics in a little while. I covered that in the commander's meeting. So we're all on board. It's difficult. Please forward that information and we will work with it. We'll continue to do exactly what we're doing. So thank you for that.
Major, thanks so much for your ongoing support. I've got to be honest, I can't turn a corner without seeing one of your cars parked or someone on patrol, and it's really encouraging. And I just like to just take a moment to acknowledge that your ongoing commitment to serving the community and the high visibility and the action has been really welcome. So thank you for that. We had a quick question in the chat, if I may. Do you foresee more foot patrol in the near future, and do you expect that to be sustained in the neighborhood as part of your strategy?
So since the beginning of the year, last year we had many more car stops than we would. We had switched our strategy a little bit due to the community wanting to see the foot patrols, directed patrols, and that's exactly what we have increased, almost 1,000% between the foot patrols, directed patrols, which means the officers are driving around the block, the area. The most recent events, we had the carjacking turned homicide. Our officer actually had that arrest on view from doing exactly what you as a community are asking us to do. And we are deploying there off of a lot of the data that we have, right? The high times of day of the week and the hours. So the officer actually had that on view. Unfortunately, the triple shooting on Thursday, the officer had literally just drove around the block and the shooting occurred, and that's when that happened, but the officer was right there. The night before, I was getting several calls about the 3400 block of Leverton. for a large fight that had broke out. Essentially is what that was my detectives out doing a handgun arrest from observations that they had done from doing those foot patrols, right? And so that was the police officers calling for more officers to kind of settle that area. So they are out. You will continue to see that. Please engage them when you see them as well. That's what we're trying to do, is build that community trust, get feedback, and oftentimes is what we're seeing is we're getting some of that tips, some of the information that we may have missed by not doing that. So yes, you will definitely see that. It will maneuver certain blocks in certain areas, obviously with the call volume. So just continue to report it. If you see anything that looks wrong, just go ahead and report it, and we'll respond out and we'll deal with it accordingly.
Excellent. Again, Major, thank you very much. All right, I'd like to bounce over to Brian Sweeney, who's got his hand up, and then I'm going to go to Janice if she can plan to briefly share her data. Sound good? Outstanding.
Okay.
Brian, you go first.
Hi, thanks, Nick. So, not to beat a dead horse, I guess, but we've, and I mentioned this before, we know where our drug corners are. Everybody sees it. Many people who live on these streets are highly intimidated. I mean, I can't imagine not being able to walk out my front door, without actually having to fear for, my life or whatever. It appears that these guys are, they're undeterred. They feel no sense that something can happen to them. We do see heavy patrols in the area, a little heavier now, and thank you for that, Major. But, we see heavy patrols in the area, and it really just seems, the police know where the drug corners are. The drug guys on the drug corners know that the police know that the drug corners are there. And it's just, there's this kind of sense of, there's nothing to be done. So we're just going to, try to keep the lid on it as best we can, and, be there to clean up the mess and restore order when it's over. And so, Ms. Bledsoe, when we spoke last week or whenever, you indicated that these guys have no fear of arrest. And, I would put it out there that one of the reasons that they don't have any fear is because literally, even if they are picked up, they're going to go downtown, they're going to take the ride, they're going to, sit in a holding cell until somebody cuts them loose. So the question is, we can't arrest our way out of these problems. Most of us recognize that, because you can't hold somebody for smaller things and, whatnot. But when arrest is the right tool, and it's always going to be the right tool when there's violence. It should be the right tool when there's open air selling of poison on our streets. When arrest is the right tool, how can we get it so that we're not at the 1 in 4 conviction rate when something comes through? I mean, where's the problem? I mean, is it the police aren't getting the evidence? Is the crime lab not getting the data back to you? Are you simply overwhelmed by it? I mean, why can't we get a conviction when a conviction is appropriate when there's a violent crime?
If I could just interject, because I think you misconstrued the clearance rate, the homicide clearance rate, where we're solving 1 out of 4 homicides, for our conviction rate. What I said earlier in my presentation was our narcotics conviction rate is actually 98%. So this idea that we're not getting convictions on bad guys that are selling drugs is a misnomer. That's not true, right? So at the end of the day, we are prosecuting drug distributors. And if there's an open air drug market, that arrogance that they've displayed in not feeling any sort of feeling the need to, they don't care whether they're going to jail or not, is the same arrogance in the past year that we've implemented these policies that they've had for the past several decades, right? And so let's just be, I just want to be really, really clear about the fact that when the police and when my office work together, as you've just indicated, as Major Hopkins has just indicated that we do on a regular basis, when we work together to strategize and get these bad guys who are selling drugs on your drug corners off the streets, it works. And so that's what we want to focus our time, our attention, and our energy on. But let's not misconstrue the numbers, because that's just inaccurate to say that we're only convicting 1 out of 4, when in all actuality, we're only solving 1 out of 4 homicides. There's a difference.
But when you talk about a 98 or 95 or whatever the conviction rate is,
correct?
The cases that you choose not to pursue, how can we tighten that up? That seems to be the loose end.
So the cases that we're not pursuing are for those individuals that are suffering from substance use disorder. These are the individuals that are drug users, not drug distributors. And what we're asking and what we're saying is that we don't want to spend our time, our energy, our resources on individuals that suffer from addiction, that suffer from substance use disorder. We want to spend our time, our energy on drug distributors, and we're more than happy if you all work with us, to collaborate with us. We will do so to partner with the police department and strategize on how to get them off the streets. There's a difference.
So I'm going to jump in. I feel like we've crossed into asked and answered territory, and I want to give Janice the ability to clarify the statistics via her presentation. Janice, I'm going to ask you to keep it to 5 minutes, because I feel like we necessarily, maybe 8, we have to start trending toward.
You're very kind.
Wrap
Nick,
up.
You're very kind.
So if we can expeditiously present some statistics and try and clarify.
I will. And let me just say, these are for Baltimore Highlands and for Highland Town. So I'm going to cut to the specific slides that address that. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me go specifically to this slide. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Hold on one sec. Sorry. Seems we're having a slight, there we go. So, you know, what I did was I went back and I looked at the crime statistics for Baltimore Highlands for January to April of 2020 and January to April of 2021. And I do this because I understand that when a crime happens that doesn't usually happen in a community, the fear becomes very, very real. So if we looked at the crime from 2020 and 2021, I'll quickly go over this. So 2020 is represented by yellow and 2021 is represented by green for these 3 months. So for a total, your crime has actually gone down from January to April in 2021 compared to 2020. For aggravated assaults, you're slightly higher. Homicides, you're slightly higher. Carjackings, you're lower in 2021. Commercial robberies, you're lower in 2021. Street robberies, you're about the same. Shootings, you're slightly higher. Auto thefts, you're lower. Burglary, you're lower. Larceny, you're lower. And larceny auto. And I can tell you that the homicides and the shootings are higher because of what happened last week. Previous data will show you that there were 5 shootings over the last 90 days, and 3 shootings happened last week. So overall, Baltimore Highlands is less violent than it was in 2020, except for obviously the homicide that happened and the shootings. Now, if I go to Highland Town, I just use different colors. 2020 is orange and 2021 is sort of the yellow. And again, if you looked at the total comparisons for the 3 months, you're again lower in crime in 2021. Aggravated assaults, you're down. Homicides, you're up by 1. Carjackings remain the same, 0. Commercial robberies are down. Street robberies are down. Shootings are at 0. Auto theft is down. Burglary is down. Your larceny is up. Your auto larceny is down. And so I think what we have a tendency to do is, you know, because you're not, and no homicide is acceptable. But when that happens, we become somewhat, we overreact at times that all this violent crime is going on in your neighborhood, but when you actually look at the data, it's not really. And I'm just going to give me one more minute. We also did a yearly crime comparison, because I know some of you said that, you know, using 2020 may not be appropriate. Maybe we need to use 2019. So here are the statistics for that in terms of Highlandtown. Again, your grand total of violent crime is down. You can see your burglary is down, your common assault is down, your larceny is down, your carjackings are about equal. Most of them are down. Your shooting, you have one. And then this is the Baltimore Highlands. And again, the grand total shows you that you are down. And then if you look across here, your common assaults are slightly up. Your aggravated assaults are down. Let's see, your street robberies are down, your shootings are down. So I just think that the points are very important, but the data actually shows that the violence for these specific neighborhoods is overall down. I know that in the chat, we keep talking about drug dealing. And again, we prosecute drug dealing. But as I told the group last week, if you don't get a good case that goes beyond just the drug dealer, okay, all that's going to happen is the drug dealer is going to go, he's going to get recogged, he's going to get arrested, he's going to get recogged, and the likelihood is that he'll get a suspended sentence. You want to get the higher ups, which take long-term investigations. You want to get the addicts so that they can get off of buying drugs. And then you want to think of a strategy for the drug dealer and give them options to change their behavior.
Hey, Janice, thanks a lot. So I'd like to stop our stat sharing there and just respond to the chat and the room in general with a few thoughts. One, HCA will work with Janice specifically and the state's attorney's office to get whatever data they're willing to release, and we will post it for your review and consumption on our website, again, to the extent they're willing to share it. Can I get a nod or a head shake if that sounds good or bad, Janice? We'll share that with everyone. That's good. Yeah.
Copy of the PowerPoint.
Yeah, and like I think we'll generally open a channel. We can create a widget on the website that'll allow you to communicate efficiently with the state's attorney's office. So let's just agree that we've got some unpacking of data to do, and I invite you all to engage in that when the time comes. Like, I think this can be a long-term constructive relationship, and just to be absolutely clear about the tone of this meeting, no one's overreacting. No one wants to see a dead body on the sidewalk in front of their house or blood on the sidewalk. Even once is too much. And so we're having a constructive, forward-looking conversation about how we get better, right? At least I think that's what we're doing. So no one's overreacting or being accused of overreacting, and we'll all digest and unpack that data and continue the conversation moving forward. Okay. Yeah, so Andrew's sources will be provided. Okay, real quick, following up on the Leverton conversation, like, it's common knowledge for those of us who live in the neighborhood that Leverton is in fact an open air drug market. In our recent conversations with the state's attorney's office and the police, the Highlandtown Community Association asked the Baltimore City or Southeastern District to provide a list of addresses where it would be good to have cameras. And the Highlandtown Community Association is proposing to grant fund camera installations, either via doorbell cameras or interior cameras, at the addresses the police specify. So we're moving in the direction of working collaboratively with the state's attorney's office and the police department to build stronger cases where, like, endemic drug dealing is a problem and where evidence is light. So we're definitely working on collaborative solutions, and I want you to know that we're trying to move in the right direction, and I'm hoping more action will come of this broader conversation we're having as a community, but we can't talk about it all tonight. So to that end, questions from the floor. Let's do it. Who's got a question for our elected officials? Well, you guys, I see Joe, you got a hand. I'm going to ask you to unmute and throw it out, and then we're going to do Colin. Joe, keep it short, okay?
Sure. This is more, I guess, just a comment, really, from my experience. I'm a native to Highlandtown. I'm 41 years old, and some of the things I've heard in this chat, I think are good, but for 30 years, I feel like there have been constant issues on Leverton there's been constant issues on the corners of Conklin, Baltimore, Pratt, Lombard, drug dealing and crime. So I realize it's more of an anecdotal thing, but I guess the reason I bring that up is because I feel like we have these conversations many times in the past. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but I guess what seems to be missing is like what the short-term goals are, or the short-term solutions are to kind of try to get a grip on some of the crime that, you know, becomes too violent or becomes like out of hand, as we've seen in this last 30 days. No one has to answer that, I guess, but just a comment, I guess maybe something to think about. If someone has an answer for it, I appreciate it. But I just wanted to mention that. I mean, I've seen some of these same things happening for a 30-year period as a native in Highlandtown, and seeing some of this stuff going on a little bit more now. And so that's what I'm always looking for, is what is that short-term answer? Again, back to Brian's point, the short-term answer is not to arrest our way out of it, but like, what is the short-term answer to get a control on this type of crime, so that people that can leave their house, walk to the store, walk and feel safe?
So Joseph, and I have to jump off, and I just left a note to everyone in the chat. My chief deputy will be on, my strategic policy and planning director will be on, my director of community engagement will be on, your community liaison will still be here to answer any questions or talk about any sort of solutions. But you're absolutely right. Like, these are the same problematic areas that we have had an issue with for decades. And so this is why we came out the way that we did. We want and we welcome any sort of, sort of engagement or ideas or suggestions from the community as to how to address this. We just want to be able to utilize our resources for the offenses that are the worst of the worst. As you just heard from Jan, there's a slight uptick in violent crime that we want to be able to address. And so that's what this is all about. I think Nick had a really great idea about cameras. And one of the things that we attempted to do, and that I advocated for rather zealously last year, are these Baltimore City Intelligence Centers, which are modeled after the Strategic Decision Support Centers out of Chicago, where in essence, they centralize the state's attorney's office, the public health arena and the mayor's office, police departments, data analysts, the crime intervention folks. And we cohabitate in these one spaces. And what we were advocating for was one in every police district, so that we could address the issues within every district. But unfortunately, we didn't get the funding for it. And so we have two B6, or Baltimore City Intelligence Centers, that we've piloted, and they're doing really well, right? And so that's what we want to be able to do in your community. We welcome any sort of solutions and ideas. We want to be driven by data-driven approaches, evidence-based, data-driven approaches, as opposed to just emotionally defaulting to what we've always done. But you're absolutely right, Joe. Like, these are the same issues that have plagued our communities for far too long. And that's why we're looking for new solutions.
Outstanding. Thank you, Madam State's Attorney. And thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. And I'm really grateful that your team will stay on. Colin, you want to jump in with your question?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And thanks for everyone being here. I think, two quick things. I think one, it sounds like there's some great programs in the works. There's some great advocacy in the works. And I think we've heard this question a couple of times tonight. What do we do tomorrow? I mean, obviously we have a lot of concerned people on here. We've got investors, we've got people who are putting money into our community, and we need them to say great things to keep that money coming in to pay for a lot of the programs that we're discussing tonight. So what do we do tomorrow to help advocate for you guys, our elected officials? And then secondly, a lot of times I work with cities in public affairs for my day job, and work with cities across the US. And what I've often found when we have these great ideas, when we have these great programs that we could do, they often fall apart because the different offices aren't collaborating together. So would love to, hear a little bit about how folks, our elected officials, collaborate to help solve this as voters and taxpayers here. And then I think secondly is, when that doesn't happen, how can we use the Highlandtown Community Association? I know Zeke's very active. I've been very active with his office. How do we do this to put pressure on the folks who aren't being a part of the solution, or maybe where it's getting held up? Because I've lived here we bought our house here, we're starting our family here, and some of these programs are new to me, but they shouldn't be. And so how can we fix some of those solutions so we all can get louder?
So if I could respond, and Colin, it's nice to see you and everyone else. So again, I'm going to reiterate a point I made at the beginning of this meeting, which is, while I think it's good that we're having this conversation that is largely in reaction to significant violence that has been surging within our community, we do hold monthly meetings where all of the agencies, DPW, Housing, State's Attorney, BPD, Brian Sweeney, Nick Curley, Vanessa, Mark Parker, all of us come together around the same table. It's every month, there's continuity, and we try to address specific issues. One of the things that we're interested in, State's Attorney Mosby mentioned and other folks have mentioned, we have a camera network across Southeast Baltimore. Very interested in deploying some cameras in the Leverton corridor. We know that that is our biggest hotspot in the Highlands area. One partnership that we rolled out 2 weeks ago was with Baltimore Safe Haven. They do direct street-based outreach to people engaged in sex work and struggling with drug addiction, right? We've had conversations, if we're not gonna prosecute these issues, then what are we supposed to do when we see folks who are engaged in activities that we don't like? To me, a organization like Safe Haven with a strong track record, mostly in North Baltimore, is part of that solution. They're the only trans-led organization in our city. They've got excellent results, and I'm really proud that they were willing to partner with Southeast CDC, my office, us in Highlandtown. I will also say, and Nick Machado had said something in the chat, one of the real concerns is underreporting of crime that impacts our Latinx community. We know that they are disproportionate victims of violence. The crime data alone bears that out, but we also know that there's a lot of crimes that are unreported, which is why, and I want to reiterate this point, it's really important that, and I know, again, not throw anyone under the bus, but when we have meetings like this one, it's really important that we have simultaneous translation happening and that we create welcoming spaces where our majority Latinx neighborhood, our majority Latinx neighbors feel welcomed, which again is a challenge, but is something that if we are going to solve our problems, we all have to be at the table together. Last thing I want to say very briefly on this topic is I really would invite everyone. Again, we see the same 4 or 5 faces, and it's great. And I sincerely appreciate those that come to our monthly meetings, but it is really actionable. Like when we think about a slum landlord on Leverton or Conklin or whoever, having housing, having Jason Hessler directly there to be able to file that report and then follow up with the state's attorney, with BPD, is actionable. I mean, it is on the spot and it's direct. It's been, a challenge during the pandemic. I mean, we're virtually convening, which obviously is a little more difficult. We were holding all the meetings in City Hall, but I would just invite everybody as we continue this conversation about what public safety should look like in our neighborhoods to join, whether you're a business owner or a resident. I'm going to have Juan, who I think is on the meeting, or Claire Elizabeth provide details about those meetings. And if you could just put your email in the chat, I will put you on the list. anyone who would like to be involved, please throw your email on the chat. Thank you, Colin.
If I can just jump in and add an additional thought before we move on to the next question. I think Colin asked, like, what do we do tomorrow? Well, like, show up at our next meeting. You know, like, we're about to restart our post-COVID cop walks. Show up for those. Email me. Email the Highlandtown Community Association board. You know, email Z. But the problems that we try and solve as a neighborhood, like the reason we're having a town hall is because people reached out to us at the Highlandtown Community Association and said, what the heck is happening and what can we do about it? And like, this is our response. If you think it's insufficient, like, help me understand what we could do better and be a part of the process, be a part of the solution, because we're all in this together and we're all volunteers. So, you know, to Zeke's point, we do have a lot of meetings and we're doing everything we can. We're like pulling every lever to try and make good things happen. So we can post Zeke's meeting invitation to the HCA website and Facebook, and hopefully encourage some more participation, because things only get better when there are more folks around the table. Nick Machado, what's your question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. I'll be quick here, and thank you again, Councilman Cohen. You kind of answered part of the first one. I was just going to say, so, you know, it isn't very uncommon that I might be speaking with a Spanish-speaking family and they'll tell me, you know, oh, I need a new ID. And they'll just kind of casually say, yeah, you know, 3 months ago I was robbed, 5 months ago I was robbed. And if available, I'm asking just because I don't know whether this would be through the state's attorney's office or through BPD, but is there any available data or estimation on unreported crimes in the Hispanic community, even if it's not the neighborhood level? And my second question, just big thank you to the Southeast District Office. I've never had an issue obtaining a police report, but aside from the data, I wanted to know, and maybe Major Hopkins, if you could give me a little info on this, is there like a guideline on retroactive reporting? I know oftentimes, you know, families I speak to, they say, look, it happened in the past. It was 8 months ago. It was 3 months ago. Like, I don't want to go through that. It's already done. Is there like a good benefit to retroactive reporting? Is there a process that will be difficult? Maybe some info on that. Thank you.
Great
So
question.
I'm sorry. I can
Go ahead,
just
please.
answer in terms of crimes. Felonies have no statute of limitations. So, and misdemeanors do. So if you're talking about an armed carjacking or a carjacking or a robbery or an armed robbery, anything that is a felony does not have a statute of limitations. So you can report it retroactively. To me, the question would be, has the evidence been preserved, or is there enough evidence to bring a case?
Right, and just to follow up on that, we have had some recent reportings, just as you have said. We have a really good community liaison officers over here, Officer Williams and Rivera. They reach out to the Hispanic community frequently. A couple of my lieutenants, Lieutenant Marino has recently rejoined us. He was the previous NCO commander, got promoted to lieutenant. We brought him back from his connectivity with the communities. So any questions like that, you can email me, call me directly. You can reach out to the district at our phone number, 410-396-2422, and ask to speak to our detective unit, and they will send someone out, or you can even come to the station and we will take those reports and explain to you exactly how everything as far as the process will go. So indeed, we are following up with that and trying to close any gaps that we have with that. And really our neighborhood community officers are doing a fantastic job with that, I feel.
Officer Rivera has been immensely helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he? Hey, thanks again, Major. All right, Keith Gibson, you're up.
Sure, thank you very much, Nick. I know we've been talking about a lot of really big topics tonight, and I admit to the granular nature of my question, but I suppose I'll bring it up anyway. So there is a corner store at the edge of, right at the intersection of Claremont and Fagley, that I'm not necessarily saying that they are doing anything illegal, but there tends to be a pretty large drug element immediately outside of it. And the business being there tends to facilitate a lot of drop-offs and pickups, and just, I guess we'll just go with loitering is a good word. But that loitering does tend to be all drug sale, kind of coming and going. And I know it has been mentioned earlier in the night, there is a level of arrogance behind all of it. Like, you know, no one can stop us, no matter how many times you call the police, et cetera, et cetera. About 2 weeks ago, maybe it was 3, I might be getting, someone will definitely remember the accuracy there. There were 17 shots fired right on that block. No one was hurt, I don't believe, but also no arrest was made. And kind of, we never heard about it again. I know that the 200 block of Fagley and the 3800 and 3900 blocks of Claremont, which are all surrounding that store, are in kind of desperate need of help right now, specifically due to this, you know, crew of guys that tend to be hanging around there selling drugs at a consistent pace. So my question is, besides just calling the police, is there anything else that we can do to try and help this along?
So exactly what we're doing is really what we need to be doing, reporting it, working together. Like I said, we do have detectives in the area that are working cases. I would be more descriptive on any of the individuals who you believe are involved in the sales of narcotic. Good clothing descriptions, if they're in vehicles, if they're going in and out of houses, things of that nature, which is really beneficial to law enforcement. That way, when we go there, we know what we're looking at. We can sit back and monitor. We have had the increased presence. I do agree with you as far as the corner stores, not only that store, but other ones. We've recently reached out to the health departments. They come in, they'll do their health inspections just as a way to work around the stores. 3400 block of Leverton, we put in a request for a street grid for the lighting because it's very dark in that particular area. So there are avenues that we're working outside of law enforcement in general. Department of Public Works, we're trying to tie in. So some of that stuff all goes together, better lighting, having the stores held up for what they need to be, right, up to standards. And it's kind of route we're going, but it's really imperative that we just stay focused. All of us continue to come together like we are and put any and all information out there and be descriptive with exactly what we're talking about. The previous meetings, this meeting, again, I'll be discussing it on the commander's meeting this weekend. That's on our Southeast District Facebook page. If you'd like to join that commander's meeting this Wednesday at 7, we'll go over citywide, well, not citywide, but the entire Southeast District stats. We'll have some conversations and just go over a lot of safety tips. And I think it's just beneficial to pull together like we are. As frustrating as it is, we are doing a lot of good work there. The community is definitely doing a good job with stepping up and helping us move this forward. So continue to report it, and nothing is as quick as we would like it to be, right? But we are moving in the right direction.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Major. All right, gang, it's 8:54. I think we've got time for these last 2 questions. So we're going to call on Michael Dorsey, and then we're going to call on Jonathan, and then we're going to do a quick round of closing comments from our elected leaders. With that, Mr. Dorsey, go ahead.
Thank you. And so thank you, Zeke. You actually largely answered most of my question after I raised my hand, but I just want to still reiterate the concept or iterate for the first time the concept that as we're hearing with the need to make evidence and deal with the major perpetrators on these blocks, and in regards to prostitution, something that I've seen often enough to call it a pattern is the abuse of the traffickers to the women themselves. And so I'm encouraged to hear that you're interfacing with Project Haven and finding a way to get services to these women so that they can potentially find a way to speak up. In the past, when I've called in, when I've witnessed abuse and I've called it in, the police responded on the scene, and the women then said, or the woman then said that she was not going to press charges and everything was fine, and she went off with her pimp, for lack of a better word. And that's discouraging, and obviously we need to break that cycle and that abusive relationship before these women will feel able and safe enough to give evidence so that these bad people can get prosecuted. So I just would love to know more about Project Safe Haven, and I appreciate that you've given me a direct way and access to those meetings, and just appreciate all you're doing, Zeke. And so the information coming from your office about that is something that I just, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And thanks for what you're doing with the garden over there. It's beautiful. So Safe Haven was started up on 26th Street, where there's a significant amount of sex work, mostly trans folks. They provide street-based outreach. They provide everything from helping to get people connected with housing to healthcare to for folks that are in addiction, if they want to get treatment, great. If they're not ready to get treatment, making sure they have clean needles and that they have that they're not in a situation where if they overdose, they're going to die, making sure they have Narcan, that we have Narcan available, and then making sure that they're engaging with the sex workers themselves. One of the concepts in harm reduction, which we've talked a little bit about tonight, is about meeting people where they are, and that people generally don't recover from addiction when we treat them as the other that we want nothing to do with, or when we talk about them but not to them. And so the idea is to be out there on the streets engaging with women. As Michael suggested, there really is a power dynamic with a lot of the sex workers in the Conklin corridor. At times they have either a trafficker or a pimp. And we have to do everything we can to disrupt and dismantle that cycle. BPD and state's attorney need to aggressively prosecute cases where we see trafficking or anytime we see coercion happening. And then again, as a community, one of my goals with these meetings that we hold every single month is for us to start inviting sex workers themselves to that table. And while that concept may seem strange and foreign to some of us, again, these are our neighbors, and it is my goal to treat them as such, just like we respond to, community who are homeowners, just like we respond to, everyone who's on this call. I want to see a situation where in a couple of years from now, there isn't the divide. We're not just talking about people doing sex work, but that they're there representing themselves as well. And it's my hope that with Safe Haven, we're able to bridge that gap and that divide.
Thanks, Zeke. I appreciate that answer. All right, everyone, let's go to Jonathan. Your question, please.
Hi, thank you. I guess I just had a quick question. It's not as directly related to the violence in our neighborhood specifically, but maybe just in general. And this kind of goes back to, I think, Delegate Learman had mentioned the longer term strategy of, making sure you provide a good education and things like that. And I don't know if this has been previously discussed. This is my first time at one of these meetings, so I apologize if it has. But it kind of goes back to some kind of negative news about Baltimore City school system that had come out, I guess in the past month or two, and essentially, how the administrative costs per student are some of the highest in the country, yet we seem to be failing, a large number of students, whether it be in a
Jonathan,
state.
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I feel like that's pretty off topic for this particular subject matter in the meeting. So can you either wrap it up really quickly or defer your question to another meeting where that's more topical?
Yeah, I can hold it for another meeting. Or I mean, if I was going to wrap it up quickly, I guess just is anything being done to, I guess, investigate or determine where the gap is between how we can provide better education, to these students when we're paying.
Sure, let's stop there. So out of respect for your question, I'm going to ask Councilman Cohen to take 25 seconds because I know he was in hearings addressing that problem. Zeke, 30 seconds, please.
It's going to take more than 30 seconds, but I'm going to try really hard. So I would say that the Fox talking point is inaccurate, right? That point that gets trotted out, we are the 5th among the largest cities in the country. We rank something like 4,600 and something when it comes to funding per students. Having taught in 2 public schools, all right, 1 second. Having taught in 2 public schools, I will tell you, we did not have heat. air conditioning or drinkable running water, you should go to your local schools. There are 2 in Highlandtown, and there's one right across the street in Hampstead Hill. Hampstead Hill is one of the best schools in the state of Maryland. Highlandtown 237 and 215 are doing tremendous work with limited resources. I am truly grateful for our partners in the state legislature who just passed the Kerwin Blueprint for Excellence. I do believe that our schools have historically been tragically underfunded, but let me just say, Jonathan and everybody else, we should all show up for our schools. Let's go, let's volunteer. They're amazing educators. They need our help, especially post-pandemic. It's a point of pride that Southeast Baltimore has actually some really incredible elementary schools, and I hate when they get all lumped together.
Thank you. I promise that wasn't a gotcha question. Like I was just,
No.
Sift through all of the, all the information that comes with. So I appreciate your response.
No worries.
We're good. Thank you both. All right, so no one else has a hand raised. It's 9:02 p.m. and you're all still here. Shocking. All right, so I would like to take advantage of that and give all of our elected officials, starting with Delegate Clippinger, the chance to make any closing comments, but I'm going to be merciless with the stopwatch. Like, take a minute, Luke, and say goodnight, and then we'll pass it along to the next person in line, and after that, we'll call it a night. And before anyone speaks, I want to thank you all for being here because we have to do this working together. Anyway, Luke, you're on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I don't think any of the answers here are satisfactory. I don't think any of the answers here make people happy. I'm going to briefly just say, whether it's Miss Mandris over there on the corner of Claremont and Fagley, or the Polsonellis or Millie who's on the call tonight. I mean, I've heard it over and over again, and it's frustrating because we keep hitting those same things and having the same issues over and over again. We are working together and we are coordinating, but I do think the community is right to look deeper into data. I think the community is right to look not only at the number of arrests, but also the number of successful prosecutions related to those arrests. I think that we have more to do in those areas. And that's some of the things that we've been working on in Annapolis and through the gun audit and other things. So I look forward to continuing to work with the HCA and forward to hearing from you. I'll put my email in the chat if anybody has any questions. That should be about a minute.
Well done, sir. Zeke, you want to go next?
Yeah, I've said most of what I need to say. Again, appreciate everybody taking the time tonight. I have like 25 new emails, so I'm expecting I'm gonna have 25 new people showing up at our monthly meetings, and Nick, Vanessa, Mark, sometimes Martin and Anne and I will have some new friends, so that's great. I will say that, again, what I hope that we can all sort of wrestle with in this conversation is a bit of a duality between the fact that Highlandtown is an incredible, amazing neighborhood and has actually seen an enormous amount of progress on multiple fronts over the last couple of years, at least since I've been councilman, with the reality that we have had a serious and significant surge in violence over, I would say, the last 7 or 8 months. And that those two things need to, can both be true and both require effort, work, and an all-in strategy and approach. And so again, I continue to look forward to working with everybody. Do appreciate the partnership with our state delegates, state's attorney, BPD, all the agencies, HCA. At the end of the day, we're in it together. And everybody who's on this call and everybody who's not on this call is committed to this neighborhood. And so I look forward to continuing to push to make it the Highlandtown and the Baltimore Highlands that we deserve to live in.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Janice, do you want to close out for the State's Attorney's Office?
I will close out on a personal note and tell you that Southeast is my district. I live here in Canton. I love the Southeast. And I look forward to working with everybody. I'll post my email address in chat, Anybody who wants to email me. I will be happy to talk about questions, answer questions forever. Thanks.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Major Hopkins, any final thoughts for the evening?
No, I just want to thank everybody for being on here, especially you, Nick. You really put everybody together. I know we've had 2 or 3 different conversations with 10 or 15 folks on it. It's really important that everybody's together on a large meeting on a scale like this. More information shared. Everyone has the same concerns. It's just good to bring the community together like we are. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Nick, thanks for putting it together, and be safe tonight, everyone.
Thank you, Major. Right on. All right, so in closing, everyone, thanks for being here tonight, and thanks for being a part of the solution. I hope we have the opportunity to continue working together constructively to improve Highlandtown and Baltimore Highlands. We certainly have our work cut out for us, but we've got to start somewhere, right? So yeah, join us at our next meeting. Email us at highlandtown21224@gmail.com and let us know how we can help you make Highlandtown a better place. And with that, everyone, have a good night.
Good night, Nick. Thank you.